Next up, handshake or verbal agreements are as old as time and have been common business practices in the U.S. for generations. Who knows, you might have even done a couple yourself. However, could it be time to rethink this centuries-old practice? Market Journal's Bill Dodd spoke with Nebraska Extension educator Allan Vyhnalek to learn more about why this way of doing business may be outdated and cause headaches during phases of succession and transition.
It's been said time and time again, you can tell a lot about a person by their handshake. This common gesture of good faith has been a staple of doing business in the United States for multiple generations. But good faith can eventually turn to bad blood if both parties of a verbal agreement aren't on the same page. While many people still have faith in this age-old colloquial display of agreement, nowadays, folks may be better off putting their business deals in writing, especially to quell any disputes during times of succession.
I think our grandparents and my grandparents and my father's generation used a lot of verbal or handshake agreements, and it's just something you kind of arrived as you were visiting on a yard or visiting out on a farm, and you just said, "Okay, do you want to rent my ground?" And yeah, here's the terms, and that sounds good to me. And they shook hands and they went on, and so that's kind of where it comes from. And there are still handshake and verbal agreements out there. I think we just have to try and eliminate them as quickly as possible. They're just not good business practice, quite honestly. So the advantage of a verbal agreement is just simply that it's simple. I mean, once the two parties agree, you shake hands and then you kind of go on. But the disadvantage is what happens if one of those parties are gone, and then the children or the wife or the spouse or not wife, but the spouse or the children or somebody else in that family has to take over. I mean, I think that's the disadvantage, because sometimes not all those lease terms get remembered properly, and then going on to the next generation causes some problems and causes some headaches. And quite honestly, you know, as we get older, it's remembering some of this stuff just gets to be a tough go. So if you have it written down, it's just a lot cleaner, especially if one of the parties is not a part of they have to take over now, so one of the parties is missing. So the written lease will allow us to specify all the terms that we want to have covered. The written lease is preferable if it has to be implemented or, interpreted in a court of law. The written lease just makes things cleaner as far as when the lease is going to start, when the lease is going to end, and what are the main things we want to have taken care of in that lease, what provisions we're going to make in that lease. It's just a more business-like practice that just makes sense.
If you are relying on a verbal agreement, good communication is paramount for all parties involved. More importantly, communication shouldn't diminish after the terms have been agreed upon, but a continuous process throughout the year.
When I get called on a pasture or farmland lease to give advice, usually about, I don't know what the exact percentage is in, but it's a high percentage, 85, 90, 95% of the time is because we've had poor communication. Somebody is not communicating with those people properly, and they're not giving them information they need. So good communication to maintain a lease is just key. And so I think that the tenant and the landlord should both have responsibility for good communication. I think the landlord should want to know, the lease should specify when they get paid and how often they get paid and how much they get paid, those kind of things. But more important than that, there needs to be good communication throughout the whole year to make sure that lease is real clean and that everybody kind of understands what's going on. For instance, right now, at the beginning of September, it's a great time for the tenant to make sure the landlord gets out there to see what's happening in the fields. I drove across part of Nebraska last week, and let me tell you, it is really dry out in a lot of these fields. I mean, we have beans and corn burning up, if you will. And so the point is, right now, the landlord should go out there and see that it isn't just a perfect growing year because of the lack of rainfall. And so hopefully by the time this program gets aired, there will be some rainfall on the ground to help alleviate some of that situation. But some of those crops are gone beyond what we can handle with the rainfall we're getting, I'm sure. So getting that landlord out there to see what's going on this year during that growing season is just key. That's one piece of communication. I think there has to be another piece of communication at the end of the year so they know exactly how it turned out. And I think there needs to be good communication at the beginning of a year, like around March 1st when lease begins. So again, there's a good, clear information about what's happening, what happened, those kind of things, so we can adjust the lease appropriately to fit the conditions of what's going on agronomically, what's going on with the market, and what's going on out there in the field in terms of field conditions, too much rain, too little rain, all those kind of things.
Another important distinction when terminating verbal leases depends on the type of lease in question. There are different circumstances to take into account when dealing with farmland leases for crop production versus pasture leases for livestock grazing.
When you have a verbal lease, you have to close or stop that verbal lease about 6 months before it was going to start. That's what the Nebraska Supreme Court has ruled. Most verbal leases for crop ground start on March 1st of each year. And so therefore, you have to give them 6 months notice, which is by September 1st of the previous year. So leases starting on March 1st of 2021, where you'd have to give termination notice by before September 1st of 2020. Pasture leases, however, most pasture leases are 5-month leases. And so a 5-month lease usually goes from May 1st to October 1st, or May 15th to October 15th, or even June 1st to November 1st, 5 months, pasture grazing lease. And so therefore, because they end, no notice is needed for the next year because you don't have a lease anymore. It stopped. The crop ground leases are considered to be year-round leases, and so therefore they just continue on unless they're stopped, the verbal and handshake agreements. If you have a written lease, then you follow the provisions in the written lease. If it's a 1-year lease, you have a 1-year lease. If you have a 3-year lease, it's a 3-year lease. And so that's the key difference between a year-round lease, farm ground, and a pasture lease, 5 months.
While the handshake may still be a good sign of faith in business dealings, it would make more sense and better serve all parties involved to put their intended business dealings in writing. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Bill Dodd.
Thanks, Bill. If you'd like more information on land management, there are numerous resources available at farm.unl.edu, and sample leases can be viewed in the document library at aglease101.org. This resource can help both parties in coming to appropriate lease conditions for their particular positions.